Devils, thank you so much for joining me this evening. If we haven't met yet, my name is Matt Frame. I'm the new school superintendent here in the district. And first and foremost, I just wanted to say thank you for taking the time to engage over the past couple of weeks with our first exchange. As you know, we have just started using Thought Exchange. And our first conversation as a community really was just a check-in, a pulse check to see how the year is going for your child. And I'm pleased to report that we had a tremendous amount of participation. We had over 1,000 comments. We had over 50,000 ratings of different comments. And when I was talking with the Thought Exchange team, they said, that's really terrific. So thank you for taking time to provide some feedback. And because you took the time to do that, I wanted to make sure that we made some space for trying to provide some answers to questions that were asked. And if we don't have great answers, at least to provide some feedback. And so that's the thought behind this evening. Before we get going, though, I do just want to make two quick plugs. The first is that tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock, our Assistant Superintendent of Instruction, Kristen Overholt, will be facilitating a great panel on the combined topic of social emotional learning and mental health. There are 3 experts from our own faculty that'll be on the panel, and then 1 outside partner from the community. It's going to be a great conversation. It'll be at 7 o'clock at night. There's a link to it in the email that I sent last Friday. I'll send a reminder email out tomorrow again with the link. And if you're busy, I just encourage you to check out the recording at a later point in time on our YouTube channel. The second plug is that a couple of weeks ago, I met with our PTO presidents, and one of the things that they shared was, it's been a year and a half since parents have really been able to be in classrooms and hallways and buildings, and they understand why for safety reasons, but it's really hard when you put your child on the bus in the morning or you drop them off at school. And so we were spitballing and brainstorming some different ideas and talked about holding some evening events at our 6 different buildings where parents could come. They can learn a little bit more about the PTO. Myself and a board member or 2 will be there for a listening session, and then they'd have a chance to tour the building with our principals. And so I'll provide some additional information in my regular Friday communication, but I hope you'll consider those 2 different things just to connect and engage with us in different ways. So why don't we get going? I will share this, that after our first exchange closed, I went into the dashboard and I looked at all the different thoughts that people had shared and just did a search for question marks. And so came up with 50 some odd questions that people had asked and just put them together in a report. I'm going to do a screen share in just a second and just scroll through the questions. Some of them I think I will be able to give some fairly short, concise answers. Some of the questions that were asked are really complicated, and I might be able to provide some things to consider on the topic. And then there are a couple where my answer might just be, that's really good feedback for us, and we appreciate you sharing it with us. Again, we want to make sure that this is a conversation, and we want to make sure that we're being purposeful about listening. I'm peeking outside. I know the last couple of days have been gray and rainy and windy. It is gorgeous outside tonight, so hopefully you're outside enjoying the sun, and maybe you aren't here for the conversation. If you miss it and would like to come back to it later, we will have it posted up on our YouTube channel. And if anything that I say here tonight is confusing or you'd like to talk a little bit more, please don't hesitate to give my office a call or to shoot me an email. So I'm going to do a screen share. Again, it's a report that just has the questions that were asked in our check-in, our pulse check thought exchange. They haven't been put together in any fancy slide deck or PowerPoint, but hopefully I can just scroll through them and again, provide some thoughts or responses to things that were on your mind. So why don't we get going? So the first question asks about a raise in substitute pay, and then also talks about teacher aide, custodial staff, and bus driver pay. So this is a really good question. I'd like to maybe provide a couple thoughts. So one is that we, like most districts, need substitute teachers. And if you want to make our main office teams really happy and you've got some time and interest, we'd love to have you join our team as a sub. At our last board meeting, we did increase the substitute teacher pay. It went from $110 a day to $135 a day. So that makes us competitive with surrounding schools. So we did make a change to our last board meeting. The question about teacher aide pay, custodial pay, bus driver pay, that's a great question. It's really important, I think, for a couple reasons. One is that our support staff team is second to none. Over the past year and a half, I think we all recognize that they have in many ways redefined what it means to be an essential worker. They have kept us safe, they've kept us connected, and we are so thankful to have our support staff that we do here in Clarence. There are a couple strange things or interesting things that are going on in the job market right now. One is that we have seen a pretty significant increase in minimum wage over the recent years. And so in a lot of districts, it's caused a sort of wage compression. And so districts are still thinking through how to address that. And Clarence is in the mix with most districts in terms of looking at people who've been a part of our school community for a long time and folks that might be new members. The second one is, my guess is you've seen we're hiring help wanted signs in just about every business. And it's not easy finding qualified employees. And so we will be purposeful, we'll be intentional about this. This is really good feedback for us to have, and appreciate the comment and appreciate the question. The second one is, why is there no teaching for students in quarantine? If you remember, when I had sent out a couple different messages over the summer, we have been 100% focused on an in-person opening. And so that means that when you go into our classes, our rooms typically have between 20 and 25 students, and making sure that those kids are engaged and learning is not easy. We've got a world-class faculty, they're doing an incredible job, but you really have to be focused and you really have to be intentional about engaging kids and providing that meaningful instruction. So our focus has been on in-person learning. We have had a handful of quarantines each week, and when that has happened, our teachers have pushed out asynchronous learning materials. They have communicated with families. In some cases, we've been able to set up some afternoon remote support, but every case is a little bit unique. And what I might ask is that if you find a child or your kids in quarantine, just to make sure that you're reaching out and communicating with the teacher and communicating with your child's school. So there's a question about recorded lessons, particularly in math. And somebody saying that having recorded math lessons uploaded to Schoology can be a great way to sort of review key ideas and go back and reinforce important learnings. So I will say this, we have similar learning standards, curriculum apps, all those sorts of things. But when you go into different classrooms, there really is an artistry that happens with teaching. And so you will find that some of our teachers are still pushing out and posting recorded lessons, and some are not, and that's okay, because there are different ways to engage kids and really drive learning off the charts. This is good feedback, though, to have for your child's teacher. So if you think that it might be helpful, I'd encourage you to pass that information along. I might also encourage you to see what online resources are out there. There are a lot of great programs and online videos for younger students. Khan Academy is something that's been around for a number of years now that has some really high quality video for secondary learners in particular, and just a great way to connect with kids and, again, reinforce some really important topics. There's a question on busing. So I appreciate you sending this one along. You note that your child is 15 to 20 minutes late to school on a fairly regular basis. That's not okay. We need to make sure that they're here in time for their first period class or for the start of the school day. Just to give a little bit of context and a little bit more information, we're not alone. Our New York State School Boards Association sends out a regular print publication, and on the most recent one that came this week, there's an article titled "Bus Driver Shortage, What's the Cause?" And so it details this very thing, that Clarence, like most public schools in New York State, are struggling for drivers, and we are trying in different ways to recruit drivers. But that does make getting kids to and then home from school challenging on certain days. We have mechanics that are driving. We have had bus drivers that are driving. They're doing an incredible job, but there are some days when our kids aren't there on time. I did meet with our business administrator who oversees our transportation department. He's connected with our transportation director, who is fantastic. They're going to collect some information and hopefully continue moving to a place where all of our kids are getting here on time and getting home safely every day. There's a question about getting some help with difficult classwork and what that might look like. I'd like to maybe just provide a couple thoughts based on the level of the grade level that your child is at. So if your child is in one of our 4 elementary schools and they are struggling with some of the content, I'd encourage you to reach out to your child's classroom teacher. We have reading interventionists, we have math interventionists this year, which is really exciting for us. We have some different interventions that might be just the right support for your child. At the middle level, we do have a learning center. We have math and ELA supports. And so again, I might recommend reaching out to the counseling department or to a teacher to see how they could access the learning center before, after school, different supports during the day to make sure that they're getting back on track. And then at the high school, there's a learning assistance center that's open for students. It has teachers and teacher aides there that can help kids with different subjects. So I'd encourage them to check in with the LAC. And again, if your child's really struggling, reach out to the teacher, reach out to our school counselors, and let's see if we can put some supports in place to make sure that they are doing a little bit better in their courses. There's a great question about clubs this year. So the question is, if sports are an option, why not after school clubs? And in this case, the answer does differ a little bit by area. So you will know that our athletic teams have been up and running this year and doing a pretty incredible job, I would add. So best of luck to our Red Devils as they get ready to start sectionals. Sports have been up and running. At the secondary level, our clubs have been up and running as well. It's a little bit different at the elementary schools. We have started in some cases to experiment with after-school clubs, but some restrictions on space and some transitions with coordinators have made it a little bit slower rollout. So I spoke with our elementary principal team, I believe on Tuesday, and they shared that they're hoping to have after-school clubs rolled out in January. So I know that in some ways it sounds like a long ways away. It'll be here in a blink, and we hope that we can get our younger learnings back engaged in after-school clubs as well. There is a question or a comment about digital electronic usage. This is one of those questions I referred to at the beginning where I said, you know, it's a great question. We could have a really detailed conversation about this because it is so important. You know, we know that over the last year and a half, our digital devices have been our most effective tools for communicating content, for staying connected with kids and families. And as we've transitioned back to in-person, there probably is a certain amount of level setting with regard to what's too much, what's not enough in terms of tech integration. At some point, there probably will be a need for having some really thoughtful curricular grade level conversations about guidelines for different content areas or grade levels. At this particular point in time, though, I'd really encourage you to reach out to your child's classroom teacher to see how much they're using the devices, if it's a concern to you, and to just check in that way, because my guess is it differs quite a bit depending on the building and perhaps even the classroom. So there's a question about locker rooms for athletes that have to bring equipment to and from school for practices and competitions. Unfortunately, I don't have the answer that you're looking for. We don't have the space or capacity to accommodate all of our athletes that are bringing equipment to school. I did speak with our principal, Mr. Smith, in the high school. And one of the things that he shared was a number of teachers will open up their classrooms to students that need a spot to store their athletic gear, as long as they remember to come and pick it up at the end of the day. So if your child, for whatever reason, isn't able to find a teacher that is willing to open up their classroom, maybe shoot guidance a quick message or reach out to one of our assistant principals or to Mr. Smith, and they could probably help your child find a spot where they could stash their equipment so they're not lugging it around with them all day. There's a question not about sports bags, but about backpacks. So what I'm assuming is between notebooks and books and then digital devices, that it's just a lot for kids to carry around. That is a fair question. I know that for our Chromebooks, we are seeing them be used more and more in class. And so my guess is that students will have to bring those to their different courses. And then books, it probably depends, textbook and regular book. Again, I might recommend talking with your child just to make sure they're not carrying textbooks and books around from class to class when they don't need to. And again, that's good feedback for a teacher if it feels like it's just too much for students, especially for big chunks of the day. There's an important question about bullying, in particular connected to athletics. And I would just share this, that we know every child that comes to school is someone's whole world. And we want to make sure that they are physically safe, they are socially, emotionally, psychologically safe when they're here. So that's really important to us. So if you are talking with your child and you believe that they are experiencing harassment or intimidation, that they're involved in a bullying situation, there are a couple different thoughts. So one is make sure that either they or you are able to report it to someone at school. If you go on our homepage, there is a section for parent resources, and there's a tab that's titled DASA. So that stands for the Dignity for All Students Act. And so it's an anti-bullying measure that you'll find in public schools across New York State. And so it has a couple different requirements. One is that there are reporting requirements for schools. So if we have, for example, faculty or staff that witness bullying, they have to report it and they have to do something. Each of our buildings have DASA coordinators. So if you believe that your child has been a victim of bullying, you can reach out to those folks. And these are people with unique levels of training. They've been involved in these types of situations before, and they can help you and they can help your child to navigate these situations. I would just say this, that our teachers, our support staff are really good at what they do. We have a lot of different ways that we can support kids, and just to make sure that you're reaching out so that we can work through these things together so that our kids feel safe and feel comfortable when they're coming to school. And again, if your child is going through something that's really challenging, just make sure that they are comfortable sharing it with a trusted adult. We hope that that is a teacher, an administrator, a support staff member here at school. But if you're that trusted adult, just make sure that you're touching base with us so that we can work through this together. There's a question about detention for a missing homework assignment. I did a little bit of digging. My guess is that this is a question that comes out of the high school, our secondary building. So I appreciate the question that's attached to it. So the question is, what's the thought process behind this? So the thought process is not so much punitive as it is getting caught up on the academic work. So if a student misses a homework assignment and they're assigned detention, it's not necessarily to punish a child. What it's to do is to provide an opportunity where they can get caught up on that assignment, because we want our kids excelling. We want them doing well in classes. And we know that that classwork, that homework is a really important part of their learning. So there's a question and a comment here about anti-abortion activists at a school board meeting. I have a couple thoughts. So one is that school board meetings are meetings that are held in public. So they are open to members of the public as long as folks can follow the district's code of conduct. So as a part of meetings here in Clarence, just like you would see in a lot of public schools, there is a public participation section, or a part where parents or community members can provide public comment. And as long as those comments fit within the guidelines that are established, people really are free to say what they wish. And so we do think that it's important to hear all the voices and to be respectful and to be thoughtful when people share. If it is related to a concern in classrooms, again, I might recommend reaching out to the teacher just so that you can do some of that information collecting and try to work through the issue before coming and articulating it at a board member. We've got a great board. They do a really nice job of listening to people when they bring forth different concerns. But they're a group that gets together to set a long-term vision for the district, to adopt policy, to adopt a budget that goes out to the community. And so sometimes these issues are better brought up with individual classroom teachers. So I was smiling when I read this comment. I really like the sentiment and appreciate the question. So it's, please send a survey to children. They should have a say too, correct? Absolutely. And want to maybe pass along two things. So one is that there is a climate survey that is distributed to all of our students and all of our parents on an annual basis. So they have that chance to connect. But I'll also share this. I just met earlier in the week with Mr. Smith, our high school principal. He and his team are putting together a thought exchange conversation for our seniors. And I thought that was a really nice way to say, we want to make sure that we are valuing student voice consistently in the meaningful way here in school. So we will be thoughtful about engaging our students. As you know, our kids are incredible with what they're doing and their perspective on school. This is their place. And so we will be more intentional about that, although there already are opportunities where we do survey students and survey parents. There's a second transportation question. This one doesn't deal with students getting to school or home on time, but it involves the amount of time on a bus. What I might recommend doing is reaching out to our transportation director or one of our head bus drivers and just collecting a little bit more information and seeing if there's anything that we can do. We do not want our kids on buses too long, but we also know that that's a little bit subjective in terms of what's not, what's too long and what's inappropriate. So as a first step, I might recommend, again, reaching out to our transportation team. It's a really great group of people. If you're still feeling frustrated or have questions or concerns, Rick Mancuso, our business administrator, who's a longtime leader in the district, supervises the transportation department. And then I'd also encourage you to shoot me an email or give me a call if you think that I might be able to help. There's a question about high school counselors meeting with students. So just to give you a quick overview of contact time between high school counselors and students, I believe that starting in December and January, our high school counselors will meet with students and they'll start to map out student schedules for the following year. So there is that annual contact time. But there are some kids that spend time every day or every week in the counseling office. So if your child could benefit from that, I'd have them wander down that way or have them email or call a counselor. If they're a little bit hesitant to do that, please reach out to someone on our team. It's an incredible group. They want to support your child, and sometimes just having that phone conversation or an email lets us know that they could use a little bit of extra support. There is a question about Chromebooks, and I think this one's targeted to implementing Chromebooks to get ready for standardized testing. So that's not necessarily the case. My understanding is that Clarence was a real leader in terms of tech integration, and that was a credit to Dr. Hicks and Mrs. Overholt as they were making those decisions on behalf of the district. They were fortunate because they did make the decision and they positioned Clarence really well for the interruption that schools have experienced over the last year and a half. So when some schools were scrambling and trying to get devices ordered and get them pushed out to families, Clarence had those devices that they were able to use to engage kids to stay connected to students. So there is an opportunity for grades 3 through 8 testing where students can take those tests on computers. And I believe that this year we'll be piloting that in the middle school, and then I believe in one elementary school grade level. So that's just as our kids get more and more comfortable with the devices, knowing that at some point we would probably have to make a shift, wanting to make sure that we are on the cutting edge of that and making sure that we're really leveraging the devices. So providing the devices, the Chromebooks, was not to prepare for standardized testing. Again, that was a really thoughtful move on behalf of Dr. Hicks and his team. But they are devices that hopefully will help us as we look at assessments in the future. A question about the 8th grade trip. So this is a great question. I actually was meeting with our middle school principal today, and she has a wonderful photo on the wall in her office of when she was an 8th grader who went on the trip. So we know that the 8th grade trip in the middle school is something that makes our district and something that makes that grade level really special and unique. We have just started approving and considering overnight field trips. So it may be something that is possible in the next year or two, but we want to make sure that we are being thoughtful as we approve overnight trips. So again, this is good feedback for us to hear. We have put together a mechanism where people can put together COVID safety plans so that we make sure that our kids are going to be safe and prepared when they go on overnight field trips. We have approved a couple for the music department, a couple for athletics, and are willing to consider others, but we also want to be respectful of different needs at grade level and just where buildings are at this point in time. But my guess is hopefully in the not too distant future, we will see the 8th grade trip come back. There's a question about why can't students purchase a treat after eating lunch? So I'll be honest, I did a little bit of digging. I had a tough time finding an answer to this just based on the number of buildings and cafeterias and lunch periods that we have. My guess is with this one that our lunch monitors are trying to limit movement in cafeterias. One of the things that we have seen, especially at the elementary level, is that unmasked time for students that haven't been vaccinated has led to quarantines. And so to keep our kids safe, our lunch monitors have tried to minimize movement of kids getting up, moving around the lunchroom, going back to the lunch line. So again, hopefully we're moving toward a point where we can have what we would consider a normal school experience and kids can get up and buy treats, beginning of lunch, end of lunch. My guess is that the limits on movement have been just to minimize contact time between kids. There's a comment about too much homework in the high school. Just saying that as kids try to balance all of their different demands with extracurriculars and challenging courses, that they can be up really late working on homework. I will just share this, that it's a little bit like Goldilocks. It's too hot, it's too cold, it's just right. Oftentimes it can be like this with homework. There's too much, there's not enough, it's just right. Maybe a couple thoughts. One is that if you feel that your child is spending too much time on homework, that's good feedback for teachers and administrators to have. And so we would encourage you to reach out with that information. I also would say this, our kids are incredibly talented and want to challenge themselves and want to take on rigorous courses and get involved in different clubs and different sports. There can be times when it's just too much. And so sometimes meeting with your child or meeting with your child's counselor and having an honest conversation about what's reasonable can be a dialogue that's worth having. We have kids, for example, who want to sneak in an extra AP class or a dual credit course, and they're skipping lunch so that they can take an extra class. And so, part of it is making sure that we're thoughtful about the work that we understand. The other thought of it is just making sure that you're working with your child or children on what's a reasonable course load and level of involvement, even if they'd like to take every advanced class that we have, play 3 different sports and be in a number of extracurriculars. But those are important discussions to have. There's a question about missing school for any reason. What's the protocol for getting kids back? So a couple different thoughts. One is that if your child misses school, they're out of town traveling, something like that, please send in a note to your child's classroom teacher or to one of our attendance clerks. If your child is quarantined or they're out being COVID tested, then there's a different set of protocols. And actually, if you go to our webpage and you go under I think it's the announcement section down at the bottom, it'll give you some protocols on getting students back in school. I will share this, that if students are out, if they're sick or they're out of town, they are responsible for missed work. So our teachers are pushing out asynchronous learning materials. If your child is really ill, we want to make sure that they're getting healthy. And if they need a little bit of extra time, again, I would just encourage them or encourage you to connect with the teacher to make sure there's a plan for getting them caught up. But students do need to make sure that they have a handle on that learning that they missed when they weren't in school. And then a great question about how do quarantines count? So if a student is quarantined, those are excused absences. The student is directed to quarantine by Erie County, and we certainly wouldn't want to hold that against them here at school. Again, there's a question about bullying. That the child has experienced bullying. Again, I just connect it back to an earlier question that we want all of our kids feeling welcome, feeling safe when they're here. Unfortunately, there are instances of bullying in Clarence, just like you'll find in any district, not just in New York State, but around the country. And we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that they have a safe and successful experience. More than anything, make sure that they are letting somebody know, letting a trusted adult know. And again, if they don't feel comfortable sharing what's going on with a teacher, a support staff member, or an administrator, but they do feel comfortable sharing with you, please let us know. We've got people who go through training every year. They have a lot of experience in these areas, and they can provide some really helpful support. So things can get better. I'm sorry that your child's going through that, but I'm confident that we can get things going in a better and a safer direction. Again, there's a question about heavy Chromebooks for kids and why do they have to be sent home every evening. So the real reason is this, I think a year ago, the answer would have been, we don't know if we'll have to shut down with a day's notice, and we want to make sure that kids have devices. Knock on wood, we hope that we're not going to be in that position this year. However, what does happen is that we may have a student test positive, and as a result, there may be 2, 4, 6, something like that, students that are quarantined. And if they're quarantined, they don't have notice typically. So we want to make sure that they have their device so that they can get on Schoology, they can get their missed assignments, they can be working while they're at home. But again, it's not knowing when a student may be quarantined. We want to make sure that they have their devices so that they don't fall behind if they're not able to be in school. I think this is a really good comment, an important question. It's about students having the opportunity to make corrections on assignments and really emphasizing the learning that comes from making a mistake and going back and correcting it as opposed to assigning a grade. We do have some teachers that build this into their typical approach with students and classes. Again, this is good feedback and things for us to consider as we're talking about assessments and we're talking about different assignments at different levels here in the district. There's a question about what will the criteria be for removing masks and COVID restrictions for the 11 and under students. This isn't my comment and question, but it could have been. I'm right there with you. We wish that we knew. We're a public school, and so our specialty is teaching and learning. We're not a public health organization, so we really do need to learn on to lean on our partners in public health. So at this particular point in time, the New York State Department of Health has established guidelines that all approximately 700 districts in New York State have to follow, and they have not provided an indication on the criteria that will be used for students and staff no longer be required to wear masks or follow other safety procedures. So we wish that we knew as well. We're trusting that they are looking at the data, they're looking at the research, they're looking at what's best for kids and adults, and they'll provide appropriate guidance as we move forward. Again, there's another question on homework. Just to keep us moving right along, I might ask you to just rewind and listen to a previous response. Again, we want to make sure that if your child is spending, especially if they're a young child, 3 hours an evening, sometimes there's a misunderstanding or we're not aware that the assignments are taking that long. So especially if you have a younger child and that's the case, reach out to the teacher and talk a little bit about the situation. If it's an older student, you could do the same thing. I might also look at what are their study habits, how focused are they when they're concentrating on that work. If that's happening consistently, that's a lot of homework and certainly something that we want to be talking about. There's another question about the district's policy for students who are absent from school if they are sick. So if your child is sick, oftentimes a COVID test is required for re-entry or a quarantine. So again, I direct you to our homepage under the announcements and information section. It does go through, there's a one-pager that our nursing team put together that goes through what students would need to come back. If it's not COVID symptom related and a test isn't required, they would just need to bring in a note to their classroom teacher or to an attendance clerk. There's another comment about masking, and so troubled by the continual mask requirement, especially for children who are vaccinated. That's understandable. I've talked to a lot of parents. I've emailed with a lot of parents. I know that this is frustrating. Again, I just want to emphasize that we are a public school. We are not public health experts. So we will follow the guidance that's established by New York State. That's the same approach that's being followed by every other public school district in New York State. And I would just pause to say this, that our kids are doing an incredible job. So I know that it can be frustrating, it can be confusing, it can be maddening with the different masking requirements. I would just ask that you be thoughtful in terms of how you communicate that to your kids. We want to be in person. We want to give them the most normal experience that we can. And the way that you message and we message, quite frankly, is important, and they're doing an incredible job. So we've been able to stay, again, knock on wood, really healthy for the first couple months of the school year. And that's our focus, in-person learning and keeping our kids healthy. So whatever you can do to provide support would be much appreciated. This is a really interesting question, or comment. So someone asked if we could turn off the stars with Thought Exchange. So I was thinking about this and talking about it with a colleague. The neat thing about Thought Exchange is that it finds a way to balance minority voices and majority voices. So if there are individuals or small groups that might have an opinion, also balanced with the larger community. So for example, if I sent out a Thought Exchange and said, what's one thing we could do to make Clarence Central School District a better place to teach and learn? And somebody said, we can change the mascot. Well, Thought Exchange allows them to make that comment. Everybody can read it, it's transparent, but the stars allow the group to say whether or not they agree or whether or not they like the comment. So it allows for that individual comment, but it also does a sort of general community check where you can do a sort of top of mind data check with the community. So people could say, yikes, I'm not sure that we want to do a mascot change in Clarence, and they could give a fewer number of stars. And again, an opportunity has been provided for a minority voice, but the community at large has also been able to say, we don't think that that is a great decision for a particular school community at this point in time. So it's an interesting comment that you make. The stars are an important part of Thought Exchange. And I actually raised this question with the Thought Exchange team, and they said that when they are providing feedback on different exchanges, they think that the number of comments is important, but they really think that the power of the star is important. And so they look at that as a really healthy sign of engagement. So that's a good bit of feedback. It's an interesting one, and it made me think when I was reading the question and the comment. There's a great comment and question from a parent about being saddened by the fact that they haven't been able to visit their first grader's classroom last year and again this year. So I had communicated over the summer that we were going to press pause on classroom volunteers. We're going to continue doing that a little bit longer. Again, because we are focused on providing in-person learning experiences for our kids, we typically have 20 to 25 students in a class, plus the teacher, sometimes a co-teacher, perhaps a teacher aide or a service provider. There just isn't enough room for us to provide those physical learning, physical spacing requirements. So hopefully later on this year, we will be able to have some visitors and chances for parents to be back in classrooms. It's tough to predict what the future would hold, but I just would say this, we hear you. We know that the parent-school partnership and connection is so important. And as soon as that's safe to do that, we will absolutely make sure that we have our parents back in buildings. Again, I would just plug the PTO events that we have coming up. If you want to come back or if you want to have an evening where you can see classrooms and see hallways, check your email on Friday and I'll provide a little bit of additional information there. Again, there's a question about Chromebooks. This one asks about access to and the use of Chromebooks for elementary school students. I'll just share this. So I try to spend time every day in classrooms. And this question is really talking about the purpose of Chromebooks and instructional technology that maybe is being used for things like gaming. So I guess a couple thoughts. So one is that as I'm in classrooms, especially in the elementary school, you don't see kids that are plugged into devices for huge periods of the day. You see an incredible group of talented, creative teachers doing a number of things to engage kids. We also have intervention and academic programs that are really good in terms of providing terrific learning experiences for students. So they are powerful tools and we want to make sure that we're taking advantage of those. If we get to a point where it feels like they're just being used for games or there's too much screen time, again, I would encourage you to reach out to your child's teacher to have that conversation. It's a valid concern, but I would just share this. Again, my time connecting with kids and teachers in classrooms is that they really are being used appropriately and for academic reasons. There's a question here about seeing schools push back against unnecessary quarantining of healthy children. So this is a great comment. I don't know if you have read your copy of the Buffalo News today, but there's an article there. So they have been collecting data from Niagara and Erie County since the start of school. And right now it looks like of the thousands of kids that have been quarantined for potential exposure, about 2% have tested positive. So that means that for every 100 students that are quarantined, there are 97, 98 students that should have been in school, shouldn't have had to miss time. And so I think you're going to see a more intentional push for things like test to stay. We have some parents and community members that have been on the front lines of advocating for this. And I think you're going to see that pressure build. And again, right now, it looks like the process that Erie County and counties across New York State are using, that in some cases it may be too conservative and that kids are being quarantined unnecessarily. Using something like a test to stay would prevent large-scale quarantining of kids. If you're not familiar with it, I'd encourage you to just do a quick Google search. There are districts and regions around the country that have used it pretty successfully, where if kids are exposed, they would test for a certain number of days. And if they're able to test negative, if they're able to test and test negative, they would just stay in their classes instead of being quarantined. A really important question about taking time to review what was taught and, more importantly, what was learned last year and even a bit before that. I would share this, that especially in our elementary grade levels, when kids came back in the fall, there were benchmark progress monitoring assessments that were given so that our teachers know where those learning gaps are. So they've done a great job mapping out what kids mastered, what they missed over the last year and a half. And so a lot of that support will be provided in the classroom, but we also have reading teachers and math interventionists that can help to support student learning gaps. So there has been a very thoughtful approach this year. If you'd like to talk more about it, I'd encourage you to reach out to your child's teacher, but that actually is something that a particular elementary schools did a really thorough job of getting ready for fall learning this year. There's a question about a couple board meetings ago, there were a number of questions asked about DEI. So if you're unfamiliar with DEI, it stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So this is an initiative that in many ways was put forth by the New York State Department of Education. And it really is a charge for districts across the state. So I believe it was the August board meeting the district had done an update on DEI. Emily Stolt, the Clarence B, did a really nice article a couple weeks after that where she talked about the district's involvement with DEI and some thoughts and plans on the year. I don't believe that the questions that were asked, that there are written responses that are posted. Instead, what I would share is this. We're working on a virtual learning session and some in-person community conversations focused on this topic. So if you stay tuned, I will provide additional information in upcoming Friday communications. And hopefully we can make sure that people have the answers to those questions and really deepen their learning and engage in some meaningful discussion about a really important topic. There's a comment about a child having a hard time hearing teachers because of masks. If this is the case, please just reach out and talk to your child's classroom teacher to see if they can do something for the level of speaking in the classroom or positioning so that all of our kids can hear. There's a question that, or there's a comment that the district has been too patient and understanding of anti-vax, anti-mask parents in the community. You know, I would just share this, that we know that the past year and a half has been really tough for all of us, that there have been times when we all have been angry, frustrated, confused. As a public school official, as an educator, trying to follow changing guidelines has not been a frustration-free activity over the last year and a half. And so we understand that people are coming at it from different places. Again, at the end of the day, we are going to follow public health guidelines. We're going to do what we think keeps kids the safest. But we also know that people come to these issues from very different places. And we want to be respectful, and we want to be thoughtful, and we want to make sure that we're taking time to hear all the voices and listen, because this is a community that is engaged. There's a tremendous amount of expertise, and we would be foolish not to want to engage and connect with our parents and people who want to provide their thoughts and their ideas. There's a question about national pride. Why was USA Day removed this year from Homecoming Week? So I talked to Mr. Smith. Homecoming Week is something that is organized by, I believe, our student council students, our class advisors. So they make the decisions on different themed and dress up days. So to the best of my knowledge, this was a student decision on what they thought made the most sense this year. But I had to do some digging, and Mr. Smith had to do some digging as well. So if there's a thought that the district had changed USA Day, that's not accurate. I believe that was a student decision. There's a comment here about anti-masking sentiment for students and for parents. I know that a couple minutes ago, I had just talked a little bit about this. We know that masking can be a difficult topic, not just here in Clarence, but in communities all across the country. Again, we're hoping that we can keep our students and our staff safe, that hopefully we'll be connecting without masks in the not too distant future. And we want to be respectful and take time to listen. And we would just ask the same from everyone as we work through a challenging point in time. There's a question about board meetings, or a comment about board meetings. Somebody saying that they had been going to board meetings a couple years ago and there weren't many people there. Now people are attending, they're engaged, they're interested, and the meetings have gone virtual. I would just share this, that the decision to go virtual was made after a recent board meeting at which there were a number of people who were not willing to follow public health guidelines that were established by New York State. This is something that Clarence does not have control over. Students, staff, visitors have to be masked when they're here at different school events. It's very clear in the guidance. And if that's not able to happen, we have to look at different opportunities to conduct district business in a safe way. I will say this, just in talking with parents and community members, there are folks that have questions that want to be heard, and we want to hear them. And so we are talking right now about making sure that we can resume in-person meetings as soon as possible. We just need to make sure that people are willing to follow some pretty basic safety expectations that, again, are not ours, but are established by the New York State Department of Health. A comment that their high schooler says that that learning is subpar, boring, and way too much homework hours a day. Middle schooler says it okay, seems like there's a lot of testing. So I think a question about amount of homework, amount of testing, quality of instruction. I might add, so, we have over 4,000 students. We have over 700 faculty and staff in the district. This is a tough question to comment on without knowing some more particulars. If you're hearing those things from your child, I might push them and have a conversation to offer a little bit more detail. If it's something that you're concerned about or have questions, again, just to reach out to the teacher and have a productive dialogue. A question or a comment, a family doesn't mind masks, but their son is starting to come home with dizziness and headaches. If that's the case, I might do a couple things. One is just to connect with one of our school nurses. We've got a fantastic group of school nurses. They have been keeping us safe for 1.5 years, heck, even much longer before that. But I would encourage you to reach out to one of them, reach out to a pediatrician. I know that sometimes the type of mask or the fit can lead to some of those physical discomforts. So it might be worth experimenting with different masks to see if there's one that doesn't bother your son or daughter quite so much. A question about, is there a way to rate a thought without going in order? A good question. So again, I'm new to Thought Exchange. I think our community on the whole is new to Thought Exchange. I don't believe there is. So I think that you will get thoughts in different groups. And again, hopefully you'll see a range of opinions, and those are chances for us to expand our understanding and see what's on other people's minds. There is a comment or a question about, would we ever consider an option to send kids back with no restrictions and allowing those who are not comfortable to choose fully remote? The challenge that we're running into right now is that our focus is on in-person learning, When you provide that remote instruction, it is incredibly difficult. It also becomes expensive if you want to, in the long term, provide those two different options. So we want to make sure that we are focused on in-person learning. That is what we've heard from our kids and our parents consistently over the past year. My understanding is certainly this school year. And we also want to make sure that we're not expanding to a point where we're uncomfortable in terms of spending. We know that every tax dollar is a tax dollar hard earned, and we want to be really thoughtful about district resources. So providing those different opportunities in the long term, I'm not sure would make fiscal sense for our district. Again, when we think that we can provide safe instruction, at some point in time, there will be decisions that local districts will have to make around choice and options. And when we have more information, we'll try to answer those questions. There's a question about the homecoming dance. I think there's a concern that there were over 900 high school students that went to the dance and they were under a fairly small tent. I would just share this. We did have a great turnout at our dance. We've had great turnouts at athletic events. Again, knock on wood, our kids have largely stayed safe and stayed healthy this fall. So I did talk with Mr. Smith about this. We had great turnout. We had a lot of positive feedback. The tent was a large tent, but it also was outside, and we followed New York State Health Department guidelines. So we did feel comfortable that our kids were safe and had a good time at homecoming. Another question about why did they take away USA Day? I talked about this a couple minutes ago. This is something that is really decided and recommended by students. I wasn't aware of this. Our high school principal wasn't aware of this particular issue. Again, our understanding is that it was a student decision in terms of the theme days or the dress up days that kids identified this year. There's a question about let our kids be kids or let our children be children. Why do they have to pay the price for sacrificing their childhood? I guess just as a general comment, again, I try to spend time every day in classrooms. Your kids are doing great. We're so thankful that they are respectful, they are safe. They've had a really successful start to the school year. We know that it's a tough part in time, but we can't tell you how nice it's been to have them back in the building this past school year. There's a question. So I actually appreciate you asking this question because I've had a couple different people ask it in phone conversations or emails. So it's a question about they'd like to know where parents stand with regard to choice. I believe they're talking about masking and vaccination and saying a survey might be nice. So I've talked to a number of parents over the past couple months who've said, you know, when making a masking decision, you should have surveyed parents. Then my response has been this. So this is my 8th year as a superintendent, my first in Clarence. I've regularly surveyed parents in my time as a superintendent. I know that Dr. Hicks did the same here. I've sent out a survey or two about different topics and will continue to do so. With regard to masks, the reason for not sending out a survey is that we'll be following public health requirements. We don't have an option. And so sending out a survey and saying, do you prefer masks or not? It doesn't matter what the results are at this particular point in time. We knew that we would be following New York State or county guidelines. So there may be a time where it makes sense to survey the community and to look at public sentiment around the issue. But right now, regardless of what the response rates and the yes/no rates are, we have to follow our public health guidelines from the county and from the state. It's just not something that we have a choice over. Why are students being punished if they're vaccinated by being quarantined? I just want to make sure that I understand this question or comment, and maybe to provide a little bit of clarity. So right now, if a child is vaccinated and they're identified as a close contact, they do not have to quarantine. So I just want to make sure I'm clear there. So when we're contact tracing, if we find that one of the kids who's a close contact has been vaccinated, they aren't required to quarantine. There's a comment about school resource officers being focused on parents that weren't wearing masks at a previous board meeting. I guess I'd like to offer a couple thoughts. One is that we are blessed to have two incredibly skilled school resource officers. They are community residents, they are parents, they are fantastic at what they do. They both have careers in law enforcement. So I would just like to thank them for their service. They have helped to keep this part of the state safe for many years, and we're just thankful that they're doing the same thing for our school community at this particular point in time. I talked a little bit a few minutes ago about previous board meeting that we had to end early because there are a number of people who refused to wear masks. Again, just as a reminder that this is not a local decision that schools have. It's something that is required by New York State. And again, we want to be in person. We want to hear from parents, but we want to make sure that it happens safely and that it happens following guidelines that all school districts have to follow. So again, we hope to be back in person in the not too distant future. And we hope to be connecting throughout the course of the school year. I believe this is a question about swimming at the high school and phys ed classes. So we do have our girls varsity swim team in action right now. They have had an incredible season. So congratulations to our athletes, to our coach. Keep going, finish strong. We are so proud of what you've accomplished. I know that's not the question, but I just wanted to put in a quick plug for our female swimmers. With regard to swimming in PE, I met with our athletic director a couple weeks ago and both decided that once you are having students swim in school, it brings up a whole number of other safety mechanisms. And right now we're going to press pause and we'll reevaluate later this year or later next year. There's a question or comment about the district working with a local, I believe, social media group. All I can offer on this one is that it is inaccurate. And so there is no affiliation. And so it's just not accurate and there isn't more detail that I can provide. There's a question about public comment periods, residents, non-residents. So just a couple thoughts again on board meetings. One is that there's no requirement that school boards provide an opportunity for public participation or public comment. Ours does, like many school districts around the state. Over the past couple months, our school board has modified its expectations for public comment. And so just to give a quick snapshot of what those look like at this point in time. So when we're going to have a public meeting, there is a public participation section. If someone would like to make a comment, we ask that they would call the district office by a particular time and date. And so that information is on the front page of our website. So they have to call, they have to leave their name, their address and the topic that they'll be addressing. And if that's the case, we put them on the list. If the meeting is virtual, we would make sure that we send them a link and some instructions on how to use that. Right now, we do want to prioritize hearing from residents of our community, parents, and people who do business with the community, as well as faculty and staff. So if people are non-residents who are outside the community, we would encourage them to go to their local school board meetings to provide public comment, but we want to hear what our community has to say. And so that's why those guidelines have been put in place. I would also share this, that board meetings are one mechanism where people can express their thoughts and can ask questions. They're not always great for doing that just because typically in board meetings, boards are there to listen, not to engage in complex dialogue. So I might encourage you to use things like virtual office hours, our upcoming listening sessions, thought exchange, email, phone calls, scheduling a private meeting so that we can talk about really complicated topics. In addition to or aside from board meetings, again, those are not always great venues for talking and having really genuine discourse about complicated issues. There is a question about, it looks like post-infection children having immune responses and vaccination. Again, public schools are expert in teaching and learning, not in public health. I have a background in social studies, and so I don't want to comment on this just because I wouldn't be able to comment with any authority. We have to trust our public health experts as we navigate this pandemic together. There's a comment about a Clarence watchdog on Facebook and this connection with schools. It's a little bit similar to a previous question or comment, just saying that there is no affiliation, there is no connection. I don't know what to add other than that, than just to emphasize that there isn't a connection. Is this the same question 3 times? I'm not sure. I see it once, but maybe it's buried in the thought exchange in a couple other places. There's a question or comment about mask breaks and students having to leave classrooms. So just to give a quick reminder that mask breaks right now should be happening approximately 5 minutes of a mask break every class period or 1 hour block. Again, when I'm in classrooms connecting with teachers and students, I do see these happen on a regular basis. They tend to happen in classrooms. If you have a question or concern, I'd encourage you to reach out to your child's teacher or to their building principal to talk in a little bit more detail. There's a comment or a question about a lack of accountability when this individual's kids see them working virtually for a full day and kids not being, I think, logging on or working the same amount. I don't know if this one is made in connection to hybrid learning last year. Again, right now, our kids are back 5 days a week, full days of school. We've had a healthy, successful start to the school year. We're hoping that that remains the case. And I want to thank you for all of your support and making sure that we have a great academic year. There's a comment about my child hasn't been taught anything yet. I send him in all day and ask him every day, what'd you learn? Nada, and then see what they bring home. So I think a concern about not challenging kids. I would just share this. You would be hard pressed to find a district that has a better set of course offerings to challenge students. If your son or daughter's coming home and they don't feel like they're challenged, pick up the phone, call one of our school counselors. We have more than 20 AP classes. We have a tremendous number of dual credit courses. We have here in Clarence a long history of providing rigorous opportunities for kids. We want all of our students engaged, learning, and being challenged because that's where we know that the learning happens. So if your child's in that position, again, I might ask them a little bit more specifically to articulate what the issues are and then to reach out to school. There's a final question or comment. It deals with Planned Parenthood and guest speakers. I just started in the middle of the summer, so I'm not sure what the details are of this issue. I do understand that there was an issue back in the spring. Maybe just a comment that in any high school, there are topics that come up that can be controversial. They are typically attached to state standards and curriculum documents. We have incredible teachers that have very nuanced approaches for handling these in balanced, thoughtful ways. If you ever have a concern with a speaker, with a lesson, with a unit, please reach out to your child's teacher. If you're not satisfied with that communication or that discussion, reach out to the building principal and engage in that dialogue. Again, sometimes it's just an issue of misunderstanding or not having all of the information. And again, I just want to emphasize that I couldn't be more impressed when I'm out in classrooms. There's an incredible group of teachers and support staff members here in the district. I hope you're proud to be a Red Devil. I know that I am. It took just about an hour to go through the questions. Again, I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. I hope this helped. If not, please feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call. And again, I just appreciate the conversation as I've gotten started here in the community, and it's been nice to meet so many different parents and residents. So I hope you're happy. I hope you're healthy. I hope you're well, and I hope that our paths cross soon. So thank you again for being here this evening.